Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Fortunately, Archie and Benny's sadness didn't last long. They knew that Roxanne would be unhappy if they were upset. After a few seconds of feeling disappointed for Estella, the boys began smiling again and opened their arms to Roxanne. Roxanne put away her thoughts and beamed. She carried the boys into the car one after another, and Lisa sat with them in the back seat. "Mommy, why didn't you tell us you were coming to pick us up?" Benny asked gingerly. While starting the car, Roxanne thought of her suspicious actions before and couldn't help but feel a little guilty when she heard Benny's words. Well, it was a spontaneous decision. Benny tilted his head in confusion. "Aren't you busy with work today?" "I finished my work early today, so I suddenly decided to come and pick you guys up." Roxanne tried her best to sound normal so that the boys wouldn't suspect her. As she spoke, Archie responded in a childish tone, "Mommy's a liar." Roxanne was stunned when she heard that. Benny also looked at Archie in confusion, wondering why he said that. "You've been here for a long time, right?" Archie looked at Roxanne's face reflected in the rearview mirror sternly. Roxanne didn't expect Archie to notice her and wanted to brush off the matter. "I saw you guys as soon as I arrived." However, Archie ignored her explanation and said, "If you wanted to pick us up, you should have informed Ms. Lane not to come. But Ms. Lane came and you were late. You even said that you got off work early today. You must be hiding something from us." Additionally, when Lucian came to fetch Estella just now, Archie heard her calling out to Roxanne. At that time, he thought Estella only called out to Roxanne because she missed Roxanne too much. Now that he thought about it, Roxanne must have been secretly keeping an eye on them from a hidden corner. Roxanne didn't expect Archie to make such a sharp deduction and felt slightly embarrassed. "I'm not hiding anything. I really just arrived." Benny finally realized what happened and exclaimed innocently, "So Estella kept looking for Mommy because she knew Mommy was here." Archie nodded. He had the same thought as his brother, but he didn't know why Roxanne refused to admit it. Roxanne felt quite helpless when the two boys acquiesced to the fact that she had arrived a long time ago without bothering to verify with her. Lisa knew what was going on. Without hesitating, she asked Roxanne with a smile, "No wonder you called me in the afternoon. You must have gotten off work by that time." Her words seemed to imply that Roxanne came early but never showed up. Roxanne smiled wryly and nodded in acknowledgement. Archie and Benny looked at Roxanne accusingly from the back seat. "Mommy, since you were here, why didn't you come and see Essie?" Benny couldn't help but ask. Roxanne was at a loss for words. She couldn't tell the boys about the grudges she had with Sonia. However, at the same time, she didn't have a good excuse to explain herself. Just when she was racking her head to come up with an excuse, Benny said, "Mommy, you didn't want to see Mr. Farwell, right? Otherwise, why would she wait for Mr. Farwell and Essie to leave before showing up?" Roxanne breathed a sigh of relief and glanced at Archie and Benny silently as a sign of acquiescence. After all, Lucian was also part of the reason why she didn't show up before Estella. The boys thought they guessed it right and stopped being angry. Instead, they comforted Roxanne, "Mommy, if you don't want to see Mr. Farwell, then don't. We will take good care of Essie." Since Lucian was cruel enough to leave the boys and Roxanne behind, they didn't want to see him either. Proud of her two sons, Roxanne smiled gently and said, "I know you will." When the boys heard her, they took the credit proudly. The atmosphere in the car became lively. Roxanne's mood also became relaxed. She would respond to the boys patiently no matter what they said to her. After they got home, Roxanne even cooked with Lisa, which was considered a rare occasion, and prepared a sumptuous dinner for the children. After dinner, Roxanne played with them for a while. Then she returned to her room when the boys were fast asleep. Her emotions ran wild when she thought of the look on Estella's face when she saw her in the afternoon. When Estella came to see me before, she was full of joy. However, when I wasn't around, Estella seemed visibly depressed. No wonder Archie and Benny were so moody in the past few days when they came home. She wanted to go over and give Estella a hug, but she didn't want to lose her chance for the medical consultation. After all, she wouldn't know if Sonia was secretly keeping an eye on her. When she was deep in her thoughts, she received a text from Jonathan that read, "My grandpa has written the letter of recommendation. I'll send it over to you whenever you have the time." After reading the text, Roxanne returned to her senses and replied, "I'll go and get it. Is tomorrow afternoon a good time?" Jonathan raised his eyebrows and responded with a yes. Then he immediately switched to his chat history with Lucian. The last message was 2 days ago when he told Lucian that Roxanne had agreed to go for the medical consultation. Jonathan casually tapped the screen and sent a message, "Lucian, how long has it been since you last visited my grandpa?" At the Farwell residence, Lucian watched as Estella fell asleep. As he walked out of her bedroom, he received Jonathan's text and couldn't help but frown, wondering if Alfred had been complaining about him not showing up. He replied, "How is his health recently? I was busy for the past 2 days. Lucian went to Summerbank 2 days ago, and as a result, there were a lot of matters piled up at the company waiting for him to deal with them. In addition to the new projects, he was completely swamped with work for the past 2 days. He even had to squeeze out some of his already limited time to pick Estella up from kindergarten. After she fell asleep, he still had to work in the study for a while." Jonathan replied shortly after, "He's in good health. However, Dr. Jarvis is coming over to collect his recommendation letter. Are you sure you don't want to visit him tomorrow?" The look in Lucian's eyes darkened when he read Jonathan's text. After all, he hadn't seen Roxanne for a while. Their lives had nothing to do with each other at all. Not to mention that she had been deliberately avoiding him. She even refused to meet Estella. When he recalled the way Estella was thinking of Roxanne in the afternoon, he felt conflicted for a moment. On the other side, Jonathan waited for a long time and didn't receive a reply from Lucian. Hence, he sent another text, "Grandpa had been talking about you for the past 2 days." After sending the message, Jonathan pondered to himself, "I've paved the way for him and it's up to him to walk the path." After a long while, Lucian finally replied, "I'll visit him tomorrow. Please let him know." Jonathan acknowledged his request and sighed helplessly. He even had to rack his brains to find a way for his friend to court a lady. If it weren't for Estella's sake, he wouldn't have put in the effort. There wasn't much work to do at the Research Institute on the following day. After having lunch, Roxanne took care of some work matters and brought some supplements produced by the Research Institute over to the Queen residence. Jonathan was already waiting for her in the living room. When Roxanne noticed that he was alone in the room, she asked in confusion, "Where's old Mr. Queen?" Pointing toward the upper floor, Jonathan replied, "He's currently having his afternoon nap. We didn't expect you to come this early." Upon hearing that, Roxanne nodded and subconsciously reduced her volume as she said, "There isn't much to do in the Research Institute today, and since old Mr. Queen had helped me a lot recently, I wanted to check on his condition." Jonathan nodded. Let's just wait downstairs until he wakes up then." Without thinking much, Roxanne placed the supplements on the table and sat on the single couch next to Jonathan. She then started chatting with him about Alfred's condition. After talking for a while, the butler's voice sounded from outside the door. "Old Mr. Queen is currently resting upstairs. Please wait for a moment, Mr. Farwell." When Roxanne heard that, she immediately stopped talking and instinctively looked toward the entrance of the mansion. Lucian, in an expensive suit, walked into the mansion. Probably because he was listening to the butler, Lucian's head was slightly tilted downward. Once the butler finished speaking, Lucian nodded in acknowledgement. All right." Upon speaking, he looked back up and glanced into the living room. When he noticed who was sitting in the living room, he furrowed his eyebrows slightly, seemingly slightly surprised. Roxanne, too, frowned. She did not know how to react to his sudden appearance. Jonathan was stuck in the middle of them as he looked between the frowning duo. Although he felt exasperated at the sight, a surprised expression crept up his face. "Lucian? It's been ages since you last visited. Why did you come here today?" Lucian gradually pulled his gaze away from Roxanne and looked at Jonathan. "I've been busy at work recently, but there wasn't much to do today, so I decided to come over and pay old Mr. Queen a visit. How is he?" Jonathan's eyebrows twitched as he nonchalantly tossed the conversation over to Roxanne. "You should ask Dr. Jarvis about that. She's the one who's been taking care of him. She recently came over to check on him as well." Roxanne felt weirded out by the turn of events. She wasn't entirely sure if she was overanalyzing the situation, but she felt that today's encounter with Lucian seemed too much of a coincidence. Moreover, she felt that Jonathan had been intentional with his choice of words. On the other hand, Lucian's gaze had settled on Roxanne once again. Even so, he did not say anything. It was as if both of them were strangers who had nothing to do with each other. Roxanne had no choice but to suppress the weird feeling in her heart. She tried as much as possible to meet his gaze calmly and smiled. "Hello, Mr. Farwell." Lucian's lips twitched mockingly. "Dr. Jarvis, please explain old Mr. Queen's condition to me." Roxanne was once again taken aback. Ever since her return to the country, Lucian's attitude toward her had been vastly different from how he treated her 6 years ago. Most times he was either ambiguous with her or furious with her. It was rare for her to see him act so coldly toward her. For a split second, she actually felt uncomfortable with it. Once she realized her own thoughts, she clenched her fists and forced herself to calm down. She then explained Alfred's condition to Lucian professionally. Alfred had almost fully recovered. It was just that he was bedridden for many years, and his bodily functions had more or less regressed. Thus, he would need to exercise a lot before his body could finally return to its original condition. After listening to her explanation, Lucian nodded his head emotionlessly and sat down next to Jonathan without uttering a single word. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the living room turned tense. Noticing that both Roxanne and Lucian didn't seem like they were willing to start a conversation, Jonathan's head started hurting. He had gone through so much just to create an opportunity for them to meet, but it seemed like it was not helpful at all. Jonathan had no idea why Lucian agreed to this in the first place. Even with a headache, Jonathan still had to do something to liven up the atmosphere. The medical consultation with the Damaris family is this weekend. How are your preparations, Dr. Jarvis? This was Jonathan's attempt in starting a conversation. Roxanne pursed her lips and smiled. I've already prepared whatever I could think of. If there aren't any unexpected incidents, it should go along smoothly even if I don't perform extraordinarily. Jonathan glanced at the man sitting next to him, hoping that he would at least contribute to the conversation. Alas, his hopes were crushed as Lucian acted as though he did not hear Roxanne at all. The latter only sat on the couch while wearing an expressionless complexion. Jonathan sighed inwardly upon seeing this. He really couldn't understand why Lucian came over in the first place. After looking away from Lucian, he turned to Roxanne instead and said seriously, "You don't have to worry too much. The Damaris family isn't too particular about these. As long as your medical skills are good, they will definitely notice you." Roxanne smiled humbly. There are a lot of brilliant doctors attending the medical consultation. I believe that their medical skills are just as impressive. Although Roxanne was very confident in her skills, Chronicles was the birthplace of traditional medicine after all. Since she had been practicing her skills overseas, she would not be aware if there were any dark horses from Chronicles. Jonathan frowned and mulled over her words before replying in a low voice, "You're right. However, I'm positive that no one is better than you in traditional medicine. Moreover, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Morrison will be attending as well. Aren't you friends with him? If he is there by your side, the Damaris family will definitely notice you." After all, the Morrison family was pretty well known in Summerbank. On top of that, Larry was also internationally famous. The Damaris family had definitely heard of him. However, since Larry had been staying overseas for the past few years, the Damaris family didn't have the chance to get in contact with him. Therefore, the Damaris family might also pay attention to Larry's performance during the medical consultation. Roxanne nodded instantly. Larry told me that he will be attending it. We've already agreed on attending the event together. Lucian, who was quietly sitting by the side, became upset when he heard Larry's name being mentioned during the conversation. He turned to look at Roxanne with a grim expression on his face. Again with this Morrison guy. Their schedules seem to coincide too much. What is going on between the both of them? Jonathan, however, did not think much of it. He merely thought that Roxanne could easily get the Damaris family's attention with Larry around. "That's great," he said with a smile. Just as the words left his mouth, he could suddenly feel the temperature beside him drop significantly. He fell silent and subconsciously turned to look at Lucian. All he saw was his friend's gloomy expression as the temperature around them seemed to plummet. Jonathan had no idea what irritated him. After thinking about it, Jonathan realized that it may be because of Larry. That was the only possible reason. Is he jealous? Jonathan was incredibly shocked. In his life, he had experienced many things. However, it was his first time seeing Lucian getting jealous over a lady. Roxanne also noticed the sudden change in Lucian's expression. She frowned in confusion as she was perplexed by the reason behind his anger. Because of Lucian's silent fury, the atmosphere in the living room seemed to tense up. Roxanne clenched her fists tightly, trying her best to ignore Lucian's gaze. She then smiled at Jonathan nonchalantly. Seeing how Roxanne was still able to smile, Lucian's already grim face turned even colder. He could no longer hold back his anger as he asked, "You seem to have a good relationship with Mr. Morrison, Dr. Jarvis." Both Jonathan and Roxanne were shocked at his sudden query. Jonathan was sharp enough to notice the friction in the air and quietly kept his mouth shut in order to make his presence as little as possible. After moments of stunned silence, Roxanne calmly met Lucian's gaze. "I've known Larry for a long time. He has taken great care of me, and I'm very thankful for that." Upon hearing her reply, Lucian pursed his lips. "Is that so? Is it even longer than the years that we've known each other?" His tone was laced with mockery. Roxanne's heart clenched at that. She subconsciously cast a look in Jonathan's direction. Lucian's choice of words was more than enough to insinuate that there was something going on between them. Fortunately for her, Jonathan's expression did not change at all. It seemed like he did not hear Lucian. Roxanne sighed inwardly in relief and turned back to look at Lucian. "My friendship with Larry is incomparable with my relationship with you, Mr. Farwell." Realizing that Roxanne was still trying to avoid talking about what had happened between them, Lucian's voice was filled with scorn as he replied, "You're right. I've only met you a few times, Dr. Jarvis. How could I ever compare with the many years of friendship between you and Mr. Morrison? I wonder to what extent has Archie and Benny accepted him?" He was simply implying that Roxanne wanted Larry to be the father of her 2 children. Roxanne's eyebrows knitted into a tighter knot. The anger in her tone was evident as she exclaimed, "Larry and I are just friends. Please refrain from speaking such nonsense, Mr. Farwell." Lucian laughed tauntingly. He was just about to retort when Jonathan grabbed onto his arm and interrupted with a cough. "I think Grandpa is awake now. Let's go and check on him, Lucian." Before Lucian could even react, Jonathan grabbed him by the arm and signaled for him to follow him upstairs. Lucian looked at Roxanne, annoyance evident in his eyes as he shoved Jonathan's hand away wordlessly. Seeing that, Jonathan felt an impending headache as he thought that Lucian was going to continue fighting with Roxanne. Jonathan had deliberately created the opportunity for them to mend their relationship, not for them to argue with each other at his house. Fortunately, Lucian said nothing further. After pushing Jonathan's hand away, he silently stood up and headed for the stairs. Jonathan also scrambled to get up. "I apologize for his behavior, Dr. Jarvis. He doesn't mean anything, so don't dwell on it too much. We'll head upstairs to check in on Grandpa. Please wait for a moment. He'll be coming down soon." He smiled apologetically at Roxanne. Now that Jonathan had spoken up to ease the tension, Roxanne naturally would not say more about the situation. She suppressed the fury in her heart and nodded at him. Jonathan smiled sheepishly and followed after Lucian. "What's going on with you, Lucian? Didn't you come here today to patch things up with Dr. Jarvis?" Jonathan couldn't help but ask after climbing to the upper floor. Lucian merely remained silent while wearing a grim expression. He too did not know why he decided to come over. Roxanne was estranged from both him and Estella. Moreover, the little girl had been so sad the previous night because of Roxanne. Lucian had deliberately come over to talk to Roxanne on behalf of Estella, but he had lost his cool the moment Jonathan and Roxanne mentioned Larry's name. If it hadn't been for Jonathan, who interrupted them in the nick of time, Lucian wouldn't know what words would come out of his mouth. Observing the furious expression on his friend's face, Jonathan sighed helplessly. "With whatever that happened between the 2 of you 6 years ago, you have to be more patient with Dr. Jarvis if you want her to accept you." Meanwhile, Alfred was trying to persuade Roxanne to consider Larry. "You're still young. You shouldn't be putting your entire focus on work. I heard that Larry would be at the upcoming medical consultation as well. I remember the 2 of you getting along pretty well during my birthday celebration previously." After hearing the old man's words, Roxanne felt rather speechless. Alfred seemed to be especially concerned about her love life. First, he suggested that she consider Jonathan. 2 days ago, he brought up the representative from the Damaris family, and now it was Larry. She was rather impressed by the man's efforts in trying to get her attached. "You and Larry are quite compatible since you are both practicing medicine," Alfred emphasized, having put some thought into the situation. As Roxanne felt bad to reject his suggestion immediately, she looked at the man awkwardly and replied, "I'll think about it after the medical consultation. That's all that's on my mind now. I'm not in the mood to think about anything else." Alfred gave the woman a disapproving look before saying, "Even though you can wait, your 2 kids can't. They're still so young. How can they grow up without a dad?" Seeing how persistent Alfred was, Roxanne's head was starting to hurt. Besides, she could feel the surrounding atmosphere getting increasingly tense. The woman had a crease between her brows as she glanced at Lucian, who was wearing a grim expression, and could feel her temples throbbing. Just when she was thinking of how to end the topic, Lucian spoke. Old Mr. Queen, Dr. Jarvis had brought up her kids all by herself all these years. If she really were to find them a dad, she would have to consider it carefully. "I don't think you need to worry about it." Alfred frowned when he heard that and sighed. "You're right. You have it easier than Dr. Jarvis in this aspect. After all, you have Aubrey taking care of Essie, and the two of you are also getting married soon. If you know of anyone suitable for Dr. Jarvis, you should introduce him to her." Lucian's eyes darkened. After shooting a glance at Roxanne, he replied curtly, "Okay." After accidentally meeting Lucian's gaze and hearing the conversation between the man and Alfred, conflicting emotions welled up in Roxanne's heart. On the other hand, Alfred, who was feeling rather satisfied with Lucian's response, changed the topic back to the medical consultation. Just then, Jonathan walked down the stairs with the recommendation letter in his hand. When he reached the first floor, he detected the tense atmosphere in the room at once. Having a bad feeling in his heart, he hurried toward Alfred and said, "Grandpa, here's the recommendation letter." After passing the letter to his grandfather, Jonathan cautiously took a quick glance at the two people beside him and noticed that their expressions were obviously darker compared to earlier on. Roxanne was still smiling a little while discussing matters regarding the medical consultation with Alfred. However, Lucian was completely expressionless and was exuding a frightening aura. As Alfred was engrossed in the discussion with Roxanne, he did not notice it. Jonathan sat down next to his grandfather nervously, feeling confused. He wondered what had happened during the short time he was away. Roxanne had noticed Lucian casting intermittent glances at her but tried to suppress the uncomfortable feeling in her heart. When the topic of the medical consultation ended, she took the opportunity to take her leave. "Old Mr. Queen, if there isn't anything else, I shall not disturb you any further. I had intended to check on your condition, but today doesn't seem appropriate for that. I'll come again another day," she said to Alfred. Without thinking much about it, Alfred handed the recommendation letter to the woman and said goodbye to her after reminding her about some matters. After watching Roxanne leave, Lucian's gaze darkened. The next moment, he stood up casually and said, "Old Mr. Queen, I suddenly remembered that I have to settle something at the office. I'm really relieved to see that you're recovering well. If there's nothing else, I shall make a move too." Alfred furrowed his brows slightly when he heard that. He remembered Lucian telling him that he was free those 2 days. As such, he found it strange that the man suddenly said that he was busy. However, Alfred was understanding, knowing that Lucian was responsible for the entire Farwell group. "I had wanted to ask you to stay for dinner, but since you're busy, I won't keep you here any longer. You should get going now." "Work is more important," Alfred said before continuing earnestly, "Remember to get enough rest and take care of your health." Lucian agreed and turned to leave. When Jonathan saw that his friend was going off, he stood up immediately and followed Lucian. "Oh wait. I'll walk you out." When the two men left the house, they saw Roxanne, who was already reaching the mansion's entrance, right away. Just when Jonathan was about to say something, Lucian was one step ahead of him. "I know what you want to say. I'll take note of that." After saying that, Lucian strode away immediately without waiting for his friend's reply. Jonathan sighed helplessly as he watched Lucian approach Roxanne. Roxanne was waiting for the housekeeper to open the gate for her at the entrance of the manor when she heard footsteps coming from behind. She turned around instinctively and met the man's cold gaze. Roxanne was stunned for a moment when she locked eyes with Lucian. After regaining her senses, she took a step toward the side and nodded slightly as a form of acknowledgement. Even though there was still some distance between the two of them, Roxanne could clearly feel the cold aura exuded by the man. The woman dug her fingers into her palms to calm herself down. She was eagerly waiting for the gate to open so that she could get into her car and not face Lucian anymore. However, Lucian did not intend to let her off so easily. When Roxanne saw the gate opening, her eyes lit up and she started walking outside. After taking just one step, a large hand grabbed her wrist. "Ms. Jarvis, are you just so eager to avoid me?" Lucian's voice rang out next to her, sounding somewhat angry. When Roxanne heard that, her expression froze before she stopped walking and turned to face the man. Mr. Farwell, we can talk if you have something to say, but please let go of me." After saying that, she tried to struggle out of Lucian's grip. Roxanne did not want to make a scene at someone else's house, and nor did she want to create any more misunderstandings. However, the man tightened his grip and said, "Miss Jarvis, do you really intend for Mr. Morrison to become Archie and Benny's father?" Lucian's voice was so frosty that it sent chills down Roxanne's spine. Roxanne found the man's question extremely ridiculous. Looking at Lucian in disbelief, she said, "I've already told you that Larry and I are just friends." "Mr. Farwell, please stop making such baseless statements." Lucian let out a cold snort before replying, "Baseless? Miss Jarvis, you seem so comfortable wearing Mr. Morrison's clothes. What other basis do I need? Besides, when old Mr. Queen mentioned Mr. Morrison just now, you didn't deny it as well." Roxanne froze when she heard that. When did I wear Larry's clothes? The only time she could recall wearing his clothes was when they were in Summerbank. Back then he had only lent her his jacket as she was freezing. However, at that time Lucian had already left. How did he know about that? Suddenly a speculation popped up in Roxanne's mind and she glared at the man furiously. "Did you send someone to spy on me?" She had asked him the same question before when they were in Summerbank, but the man had denied it. As such, Roxanne had assumed that she was just overthinking. However, if he did not do that, how could he possibly know so much? Ignoring her question, Lucian stared at Roxanne coldly and continued asking, "How far has your relationship with him progressed?" Roxanne had a deep crease between her brows when she heard that question. With a stern voice, she replied, "Lucian, stop being ridiculous. There's absolutely nothing between Larry and me. Even if there is, it's none of your business. What right do you have to interfere with my personal life?" Lucian clenched his fists and tried hard to suppress his rage. The atmosphere was getting tenser by the second. Roxanne felt exhausted talking to the man who was acting in such a stubborn manner. "Mr. Farwell, please know your place." A few seconds later, the woman looked away and said coldly, "I have to go now. Please let me go." When Roxanne felt Lucian loosening his grip, she retracted her hand at once and looked up at him. "Mr. Farwell, Larry and me are really just friends. As such, please don't give him any trouble. Also, I would appreciate it if you could stop keeping watch on me." After saying that, without waiting for Lucian to reply, Roxanne turned around and got into her car at once, as if she could not wait to get away from the man. Lucian was only jolted back to his senses after Roxanne's car disappeared into the distance. He then slammed his tightly clenched fists into the car door. Even though he knew that Roxanne was right when she said he was in no position to interfere with her personal life, he could not help feeling angry at the thought of her getting close to another man. "Lucian?" Frida, who had just returned home, spotted Lucian at the gate and approached him excitedly. However, when she got closer to him, she could clearly feel the cold aura surrounding the man. Sensing that, Frida's heart skipped a beat. The terrifying look on Lucian's face had made her forget what she wanted to say to him a moment ago, but unfortunately she already caught Lucian's attention. When Frida met Lucian's chilly gaze, her mind went blank and her smile froze. "Are you leaving?" "Yeah," Lucian replied coldly. Feeling extremely nervous, Frida tightened her grip around her bag and asked in a fluster, Is Aubrey recovering well? I haven't visited her these 2 days and I'm not sure how." Without waiting for her to finish her sentence, Lucian shot the woman a cold glance before opening the car door and getting into his car. Frida's voice stopped abruptly as the car door slammed shut right in front of her. The next second the car sped away, almost grazing her body. Frida got a shock and took a few steps backward at once. She was only able to regain her composure after Lucian's car disappeared from her sight. After standing by the gate for a few more moments to collect herself, she turned around and entered the mansion. Meanwhile, Alfred and Jonathan were sitting on the couch while talking about office matters. When they saw Frida entering, the two men looked toward her simultaneously. Grandpa, Frida greeted Alfred before sitting down next to him, hugging his arm affectionately. Alfred had always doted on Frida. Although he had flared up at her previously, it had already been a few days. Besides, Roxanne's matter had been settled as well. As such, he was no longer mad at his granddaughter and acknowledged her with a smile. "Where did you go?" Jonathan looked at his sister with a frown. "I went shopping with my friends," Frida replied sweetly. After saying that, she looked at her brother cautiously and continued, "Lucian was here just now?" Jonathan cocked his brows and asked, "How did you know that?" When Frida thought of what happened at the gate earlier on, she sulked and complained, "I met him at the gate just now. He's in such a bad mood. I wonder what got into him." After hearing what Frida said, Jonathan subconsciously turned to look at Alfred. Alfred appeared puzzled. They were happily chatting not too long ago. Then Lucian said something had cropped up at work and left hurriedly. Yet why did Frida say he had appeared angry? Judging from Frida's demeanor, Lucian was clearly quite annoyed. Did something happen at work? On the other hand, Jonathan could guess what had happened. He knew Lucian must have argued with Roxanne again. Although he tried his best to create opportunities for the both of them to patch up, it seemed pointless as all their meetings would always end with an argument. "I wonder if they are sick of fighting so much, because I sure am tired of watching them do that." Looking at Jonathan and Alfred's reactions, Frida was baffled. At first, she thought Lucian was irked with the two of them. However, she realized then they were not the cause of his irritation. So why is he so angry? He did not even react when I brought up Aubrey. After leaving the Queen residence, Roxanne glanced at her watch and noted that it was still working hours at the Research Institute. Hence, she decided to head back there. On her way there, Lucian's words rang in her head relentlessly. She felt tormented. It was not the first time he questioned her relationship with Larry. If the clock were to turn back to 6 years ago when they were still a married couple, Lucian would never ask her such questions. He would not be bothered by how close she was to other men. On the contrary, he might even feel at ease with it. Now they were no longer related. Yet Lucian was harping on the issue and even grew mad with her. Roxanne could no longer tell what he was thinking. When she returned to the Research Institute, Colby was still working in the research facility. He turned around and was surprised to find Roxanne there. "I thought you went to the Queen residence. Why are you back this quickly?" Acting unbothered, Roxanne shrugged. "After I wrapped up my business there, I came back." Sensing something off with Roxanne's reaction, Colby continued to look at her with concern. However, Roxanne buried herself in work straight away. After she noticed Colby staring at her, she merely smiled faintly at him. In spite of that, Colby felt upset when he saw her gaze. Judging from Roxanne's expression, he knew she was not ready to share anything. As such, he did not pursue the matter and could only watch Roxanne remain in low spirits. The only thing he could do was help her with her workload at the Research Institute. With that in mind, Colby started with some of Roxanne's work. That took Roxanne by some surprise. The Damaris family's medical consultation should be happening in a few days, right? Colby asserted, "You should prioritize that and prepare for it. Leave your Research Institute duties to me." Hearing that, Roxanne pursed her lips before she hesitantly replied, "Thank you for your help." Colby smiled back at her reassuringly. The rest of their colleagues in the Research Institute also knew that Roxanne would attend the Damaris family's medical consultation. Therefore, they did not hesitate to offer their help too. Dr. Jarvis, you should take the time to prepare for the medical consultation and help boost the name of our research institute. Dr. Jarvis, don't worry. We are here to help with the work so you can have peace of mind to focus on the medical consultation. Everyone knew the Damaris family was reputable in Chenia's traditional medicine scene. If they could gain the Damaris family's favor, it would help make their research institute seem more esteemed. Roxanne felt touched by everyone's supportive words. After she thanked them, she returned to her office. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.